ramble about this one. I'll include this in our next episode. This is very quick. Definition of a loser. Can you see that, Luke? His definition of a loser? My characterization of a loser is someone who, after making a mistake, doesn't introspect, doesn't exploit it, feels embarrassed and defensive rather than enriched with a new piece of information, and tries to explain why he made the mistake rather than moving on. And he furthermore, he just kind of says, and this is Taleb, of course, they make out that there's some kind of victim, part of a larger plot, their boss, the weather, some sort of external force. To be honest, this idea is very simple. I wanted to put this in the podcast because I think I actually need to remember this more than anything else.
I think we all do. It's very easy to... The default position when something bad happens is to look to an external source.
Isn't it funny, though? It's the combination of looking to the external source plus also kind of roasting ourselves. Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny that it's not one or the other, but it's both? It's kind of like we double sabotage.
Yeah, you really have to fight against it and sort of analyze
fight against it or retrain the
that...
thinking or take a different posture. Like, for me, it's easy when I'm in the right mindset before something happens. I think I normally get stuck when I have a really locked in expectation, which is super hard to avoid. So I haven't figured this out. But the expectation is kind of like having your feet planted and then getting hit by a tackle, if that makes sense. That's when you're going to break your ankle. But when you stay light, when you're not attached to what you're doing. For example, Luke, if you have a brand new idea and you call me and 10 other friends and say, this is this idea I just had. Like, is there something to it? And we can say, maybe not that way, but if you did X or Y. But if you've been sitting in this idea for, months and you've been working at it and you've been thinking about, this is going to be big, this is what's going to actually be my legacy, you're much more scared to get feedback. And that's where I think this is the idea of kind of being planted and the concept of strong ideas loosely held and being a psychological nomad. These are all past episode concepts. I think that's a big, so don't be a loser. And I'll spring right into the next one, semi-related, but they're both short, so we can put them in one episode. Don't expect plaudits for bringing the truth. So this also comes from Antifragile. So he mentions the story, this is pretty crazy, the story of a guy, I'm going to try and say this, Ignaz Semmelweis, who was an Austro-Hungarian doctor. And I think Taleb kind of rightly paints him as a true hero. This guy, I think he was around, I think it was the 18th or 19th, I think it was the 19th century perhaps. And he noticed that there was such a high mortality rate amongst women who'd given birth or were in hospital. So he realized that he figured out that they needed to introduce hand washing to actually save their lives because they're actually all getting infected from the doctors. And funnily enough, he was laughed at and ridiculed by the medical association at the time. And actually eventually had some sort of breakdown and was put in an asylum. And I think eventually died of an infection. Eventually got some sort of gangrenous infection, maybe after being beaten, it said, and died. And was only adopted, hand washing was only adopted years later and ended up saving a lot of lives. And my takeaway from this, the Semmelweis story, to me is all about leadership. And Taleb puts a really big emphasis on ethics, which I don't see in that many thinkers. But he has a very strong sense of ethics. And I don't know, to me, this story just prompts, when you think about this guy and his persistence, trying to do the right thing, it just kind of transcends a lot of the bullshit success markers we have. Status, awards, approval from one's peers. This guy was able to kind of put all that aside to fight for what was actually right. But those are most of the things that people are grappling over. Right? And it's always interesting to think about what's worth more than the things we're normally worried about. Choose the right headaches in a way. Choose things that matter. Because I think we don't hold people in our education system. I don't know, Luke, I don't think we hold people to that standard, to be honest. I don't think we treat them as if they're people who can go and affect real breakthroughs and be real leaders. I don't think there's a lot of talk of leadership in education, institutions, more so for me, high school than anything after. But I'd argue there's not a lot of cultivation of it. But I think you can clearly see with a story like that, incredibly high value to society when people take on that mantle. But it's not really part of the narrative. And I think it comes from a lack of respect and appreciation of what everyday people are actually capable of, to be honest. Like, it's not an intellectual ability at all. So it's not.
It's very, yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's very intrinsic. Ethics is like it's hard to define, but when you violate something when you do something that's unethical, you certainly get the feedback from your conscience, or at least I do. But in certain situations, it's very dependent on the environment. For example, a lot of things are justified based on your environment. You can easily say, I did this because of this, and depending on the severity or the group of people you're around, it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. But deep down, you know that it's not right, and it's a feeling for me, at least, more than anything I can. It's very hard to rationalize or sort of put words to violating your own sort of internal ethical
that's
compass.
Very well said. It is not easy. I don't pretend to be remarkable at it. I do really try. It's particularly hard when people you have a great deal of affinity with do something or give a subtle cue for you to like behave differently than your ethical compass is indicating. I'm trying to think of any specific example I've been in. But I think, for example, pressuring people to do certain things that they just don't believe in, or pressuring people to go along with you. I've had the pressure to drink when I'm, not drinking and stuff like that. I mean, but that's not even ethical. I think for me, one is probably, my experiences in the non-profit world made me like very cautious about things we donate to and stuff like that. That's probably a real example, because I think sometimes the things we put money towards trying to do good actually do harm. But my experiences have given me particular insight on that. So other people don't necessarily think of it that way. And so sometimes I think if someone's fundraising for something and asks for money, it's like, are you indulging that? Is that unethical? Do you, do you like put a market down? Do you make a big deal out of something? Like every day, I think human beings are like almost forced to contradict themselves. It's not easy. It's not black and white at all.
Yeah, a big one I can think of is white lies, for example.
Good example.
At what point is a lie, even how small it is, what I've found is at least it always comes back to bite you in one way or another. Or exaggeration, when like exaggeration's a big one, obviously. Obviously being in sales, or that comes back to bite you very, very quickly. Or just not doing something that's in the other person's best interests, and they might not even be aware of it, or no one else will be aware of it, no one else will care about it, but deep down.
I think they're good. I think about the environment too. Like, I've just never really looked much into environmental stuff, but I know it's so big as well. Like, I definitely have all these other causes I'm definitely like locked horns with. And sometimes the narrative I tell myself is, well, you don't need to worry about these other things because you're doing your bit here. And there's some merit to that, but also it's probably not good enough as well. I'll be honest.
Yeah, that's me. That's me with politics and stuff. Just being ignorant, because my excuse is I can't control it, and there's no point. There's no point even.
No disrespect to any politicians, but I actually have consciously looked at that and think that's just beyond. That's beyond.
The payoff?
That's beyond salvaging. It's normally a conversation of the lesser between two evils, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like, but in my case, like, well, you probably shouldn't be completely ignorant.
Well, note to the listeners, Luke and Joe are on a continual exploration of our ethics.
That's a dig at myself, Joe.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Me too.
I don't know about your.
I'm not much. If I'm better at all, it's not by much. I can assure you of that. Let's just move on.
That was meant to be the short episode, yeah.